Hello, I'm Adam Frost. Welcome to my little bit in virtual Chelsea, which, as we all know, is very strange because in reality it's very strange times. Even stranger for me in the sense that I hadn't done a garden since 2015. I told the nation I wasn't going back and I promised Mrs. Frost. But I left a little caveat that said if I was offered the triangle at Chelsea, I might be interested in coming back. Anyway, earlier on last year, Sue Biggs from the RHS phoned me up and said, do you fancy coming back and doing a triangle? And I went, well, maybe. What's it about? Well, it's about something you love and it's something you care about and you're passionate about. Go on, carry on. So we had this conversation. And out of that was born a garden that celebrates the year of plant health, which seems slightly ironic with everything that's going on at the moment. And as you can imagine, that message, that celebration, that getting it out there has been buried, and to me it's still an important message, and we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. But the garden was supported by DEFRA, by Horticultural Trade Association, obviously, and the RHS and other industry bodies, and it was to tell that story of biosecurity, plant health, and the worries and the concerns that we had out there. But before I tell you about that, I'll tell you about the space. The triangle at Chelsea is over 50 metres long, so it's twice the length of any other garden, about 14 metres wide. And it's fascinated me because I think it's quite a difficult space to deal with. You know, if you're a visitor, you come along the main avenue, you then walk around this massive sort of island. And for me, Chelsea gardens are about atmosphere. They're about pulling you in, you know, taking you somewhere else. And sometimes with a triangle, because you can see across it and you can see other people moving around, it for me waters it all down a bit. So that was a concern when I was creating, and so we had to tell this story about biosecurity. And would you believe that there's now over 1,000 pests and diseases that sit on DEFRA lists? So if I explain something like Xylella, which is something that a lot of people would have heard about, caused all the problems with the olives down in Italy, in the few years that I've been working, it's gone from affecting 200 species of plants to now over sort of 500-600 species, and that's developing and changing all the time. And within that, like I said, are your olives, but also lavenders and rosemaries. So though we sit in a time when, you know, we're being attacked by a virus, in a sense, you know, our natural world is attacked all the time from different directions. And for me, the more research I did, the more upset I got. And then it took me to a place, how do I sort of tell this story? And to do it, I suppose, like I said, I got a bit upset, and I decided to split the garden in two, all right? So if you imagine, if you look at these two little buildings that you can see, hopefully Amber Lily on the camera is my daughter, by the way, the 15-year-old. She's getting very good at this in lockdown. She's doing lots of them. She's now laughing, so it might be shaking a little bit. So these two little buildings were going to be my take on, I suppose, on gatehouses. And then my head went to this idea of what if things started destroying the English landscape and our gardens? And I decided that it was going to be about things that I love. So I took elements of the English landscape, British design, and started to work those into this space. So we go back to those two buildings, the gatehouses. They were actually going to be art galleries. So they were going to hold 1,000 pictures of the pests and diseases. You as the public were going to be allowed to come in, experience that. Maybe it just wouldn't be about shock, it would be about talking about what we could do, what the future holds, maybe how we can all help each other and work together. And then from that, I split the garden in two halves. So one half, I suppose I ended up calling it the naughty side, which is not necessarily the right way to describe it, you know, and the good side. So in a sense, the naughty side was, you would come through, you'd view up across the steps, and you'd look to my take on a typical sort of British knot garden, you know, with a twist. If you imagine all the problems that we've got with box hedging and things like that, so that was going to set that sort of central piece. And from that side was going to be totally and utterly planted with plants that were carrying issues. Some really serious issues, some not so, that we live with in our gardens. And then for me, at the end of each space, one of my biggest worries is not just our gardens, I suppose, because in reality they will change, they'll evolve, because we gardeners will keep planting things as things, you know, do die or we have problems. Whereas our landscape for me is a different kettle of fish. It's been taken in a certain direction over a number of years, and that knock on to that landscape could be horrendous. So I wanted to put an ode to the landscape at each end. So if you imagine you go through what would be classed as a garden that a lot of you would have understood. At the end of it, it would have had a buxus hedge, a monoculture hedge, and then a monoculture collection of trees that held problems. And even within wildflower, you know, there is pests and diseases that will wipe out certain species of wildflower. So that was going to set the tone there. But and then the other side, you were going to come up, you were going to come to a central pool that I suppose said, stop, reflect, have a little think. You know, this is where we are. And then start to look at the planting, and maybe the planting just looks slightly differently to what, you know, you've seen necessarily before. And I think in two ways. We've got used to going to Chelsea and seeing gardens planted in a certain way. And I was comfortable probably planting the naughty side than I was planting the new side. Because for me, this side is all about diversity. And that is where my head ended up going. In reality, when I show you around the garden in a minute, I think it's influenced the way that I'm gardening and the way that I'm moving forward. Anyway, back to this. So that diversity, which takes me right out of a comfort zone when it comes to Chelsea planting, because I was brought up and taught to plant less is more, you know, bigger drifts, you know, repeated patterns. For me, garden design is very much going to have to go away from that. At the end, I was going to put in a mixed hedge, again the diversity, and then a meadow, looking at what we might plant in our woodlands in times to come, you know. And always, everybody wants to know how a designer gets to that, all right? So I got to that piece of design by, first of all, getting upset, and then thinking about the British garden, the British landscape, what it meant to me. That led me to two pieces of music. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but they were two pieces of rock music that talked about love and talked about loss. And as I was listening to these pieces of music, one was about your youth and then maybe going back to somewhere that you'd fallen in love and it had all changed, and the other was just maybe only about having one love. Would we not treat everything just a little bit better? So that was it. That's what drove that garden. I do hope when everything calms down and we get back to normal that we get to be honest, shout and scream about this story, because it's important. It's important that we look after our wider landscape, and we definitely look after our gardens. And I know the RHS are going to do a lot, and I know the government. I mean, why we've been in lockdown, some of you might have seen that we've got restrictions now on the olives coming into the country, the rosemary and the lavenders, which has got to be a good thing. Anyway, diversity. But Chelsea's not just about the gardens, all right? First of all, it's about the group of people that you spend that time with, and not just your landscapers, your craftsmen, your nurserymen, all those wonderful people, but also the bloke on the gate that does the security, that sorts the traffic out, that does the first aid, even that health and safety fella. You get used to seeing these people year in, year out, and they become friends. I've been watching a bit of what's been going on social media and people putting up pictures, and it's just a little pan of you're missing your mates, and it becomes an annual get together.